Welcome back to the Sync My Music podcast, of course, Apocalypse Edition. The world is burning down right now, and there are looting, there's riots, there's protesters, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration, a lot of fear going on in the world right now. And so we decided this would be a perfect week to talk about eliminating or handling stress in effective and healthy ways, because I know most of you guys listening to this, watching this podcast right now, are at higher levels of stress than usual. And obviously, with the quarantining, the lockdown, the shutdown of the economy, that's enough for any of us to really have to deal with, okay? And now on top of that, we have to worry that there's going to be some looting or some crazy chaotic riot going on in our hometowns and destroying our local businesses or marching into neighborhoods. And so needless to say, we are all under a lot of stress right now, and we're all basically feeling a lot of pressure. And so I just wanted to make sure that at least in one little podcast you hear throughout the week, you have a little bit of counterbalance against all the insanity and the fear and the violence and the anger that you're being fed from everybody else probably in your life and every media outlet and everything on TV and social media. Maybe this could be, if anything else, just about maybe 30 minutes to an hour of something different. So you can just for right now, take a big deep breath if you are stressed, big breath from your belly, hold it for a couple of seconds, slowly release it, and just try to give yourself a vacation from all that stress and anxiety that you've been feeling for just 30 minutes. I promise you, you can get right back to it. As soon as this episode is over, go right back to your worrying, go right back to your anxiety, and then following the news, you can go right back to all that kind of stuff. I promise you can do that. But just for a little bit, give yourself a little vacation from it. I think you deserve it. I think you're going to really enjoy having a little break from all that craziness, okay? So I definitely want to talk about what causes our stress, and especially right now because of all the stuff going on in the news. I wanted to share with you guys what's happened to me in the last 6 weeks, essentially, and what I've noticed because I've drastically changed my habits. And it's ironic that I am obviously a TV film sync licensing producer, and that's been the primary thing I've been doing with my career. But for the last 6 weeks, I basically haven't watched any TV at all. I actually, in my living room, I have a projector with a screen. I decided to basically pull the screen up because I didn't want to even have it as an option. The projector is turned off. And I just thought, let's see what happens if I just don't have TV for a while. And it caused me a lot of anxiety when I first put that screen away and just decided I'm not going to watch anything. It really freaked me out because that's usually how I would unwind. That's usually how I would, have a little bit of escapism and kind of get away from my stress. And so by just putting that away, though, I started to have to, it created this hole, right, where that used to fill. And I had to decide what I'm going to do instead of that. And so I basically had to start creating new habits and new other forms of trying to escape, because I think some level of escaping serious stuff is actually very healthy for us. It's just like a human trait. Of course, when you escape too much, which I'm certainly guilty, I can be guilty of that, you start to live in alternate realities and you disconnect from real things, and you don't want to go that far into it. But definitely, there's a lot of stuff going on right now, and just having a little bit of a 30 minutes, an hour of something just enjoyable and pleasurable that takes you out of your own mind, takes you out of your own concerns. It's a very therapeutic and healthy thing to do. So, now I'm getting back into reading. I've read a little bit in my life, but really not a lot. And now I went to Amazon and went on a, book binge essentially, and just piled myself up with 20 books that I've been wanting to read, wanting to get into. And that's been a big part of what I do now, as opposed to watching TV. Also, doing something as ridiculous, and it's not ridiculous. I thought it was until I started doing it. But actually, a puzzle, literally taking a 2,000 piece puzzle, jigsaw puzzle essentially. It's extremely difficult, but I didn't realize how much it challenges your brain in new, interesting, creative ways, where you're trying to solve all these micro problems. And when you solve one and you put the puzzle piece that actually fits, you get this little hit of dopamine, and it feels really, really good. And so it's just a much more interactive kind of an activity to do. And of course, gardening, doing more yard work, doing a lot of projects outside, getting more exercise, drumming, definitely doing a lot more drumming now. So I'm starting to fill my life up with a lot of these much more productive things where I'm actually engaging in these, as opposed to being passively sitting on a couch watching TV. And I have to say, because of all of that, I don't know at all what's going on in the world right now in terms of the news, because that would be one of the ways I would get my, information about what's happening in the news is through TV. And because I have not been watching it at all and just been kind of going through my own personal journey of dealing with a lot of personal issues, I was kind of just blindsided the other day when I heard that our local community is going to have these potentially violent protests. I'm like, for what? What's going on? And then I realized, whoa, like there was this wrongful death, or it's a death that's being investigated. And, there's all these riots all over the place, and there's things burning down. And I was just completely turned off to all of that. Like I had no idea any of the stuff was going on because I was completely in my own life. I was not being consumed by the news out there. And I have to say that I know a lot of people are stressed about it, but I'm just going to be honest with you guys. Like, I'm not stressed about it. It's really not even a thing for me. It's not even a thing that I worry about. Of course, if there's a riot and there's a mob coming into my neighborhood, oh yeah, that's going to be a problem for me. I'm going to keep an eye on that, and I'm going to do what I need to do to protect myself and protect my family and that kind of thing. But in terms of what's happening in other countries, or not countries, but other cities, halfway across the country or on the East Coast, it's not really has nothing to do with me right now. It really has nothing to do with me. And so that's one of those things where I've never had that though, because my entire life I was always the guy that was like, I'm consumed by this news story. One bad thing happened to one guy over in Florida, and that has to be my whole, I'm thinking about that for the next 2 weeks. That was me. And most of my life, that was me, a news junkie, always on the edge of my seat, always wanting to get every gruesome little detail from all these, really sad and horrible and worrying news stories. And I have to say, it's been kind of nice just taking a little vacation from all of that and just going, it's not really for me. That's not really my story. That's not really my concern right now. My life has a lot of concerns right now. And so I'm being selfish right now and just going into my own life and deciding what I want to change in my own life. So for whatever that's worth, guys, if you want to take a break from watching the news, or take a break from social media, or take a break from anything that you find you constantly go to as sort of an addiction sort of thing, and it feeds your fear and it just keeps putting you in this sort of bad mood, you have my permission, at least if you need permission. Take a break. It could be just an hour, or maybe a day, maybe a week. It doesn't have to be 6 weeks. It doesn't have to be the rest of your life. Or maybe just try to limit your amount of exposure to this kind of content, because I can't think that it's got to be very healthy to know that, like, in all of the world, one person, let's assume that he was wrongfully killed, why does that have to be the one thing that we all just, we put a magnifying glass on? We all have to spend all of our time thinking about that, because you could easily also think of all the great things that happened that same day, and also that happened great to you in your life. Doesn't mean you have to ignore terrible things that happened, but there is some sort of a, it's kind of like your self, what do you call it? I don't know. You're self-punishing yourself or something like that, where you're only looking for the one little negative thing that you can possibly look at, and just like, oh my gosh, the world is terrible, it's awful, and it's hateful, and this and that. And yes, that act is hateful, and it's terrible, and it's awful. But there's so much beauty in the world too, and I think a lot of people are kind of like just skipping over all the beauty and all the great things and all the joys of life, and focusing on the fear. And believe me or not, I know the news media is aware of that. Like, this isn't just them innocently reporting this stuff. They know what's going to get your amygdala in your brain to get your fight or flight response going. So this is definitely manipulative with a lot of the news organizations that are reporting this kind of stuff. So you are certainly a victim in some of that sense, because your brain, in some ways, you can't control that. Your amygdala does want to find those fears or those worries so that it can try to protect you. So anyways, for whatever it's worth, you have my permission to take a vacation, and you're not a bad person for doing that, okay? I'm not a bad person for taking a vacation. I know I'm not a bad person for doing that. You wouldn't be either. So with that being said, Mike, why don't we start with you, man? What do you think about, like, news consumption, and what are your news consumption habits, and maybe some of the bad habits that you've had, or something that you've done to be able to find balance for yourself?
Well, yeah. First off, I just want to say that, the three of us sitting here kind of talking about this, like, I just want to make it clear that all three of us actually have the fortune of not actually being, needing to worry about a lot of things that there's other people that really need to worry about when it comes to even just plain survivability. So we can sit here and we can debate and discuss about all these kinds of things when things are going on around other people that, who are caught up or whatever, like, they have to actually think about their own survivability. So, like, in a case like this, I think that, like, this isn't necessarily just one bad sort of circumstance that happened. Unfortunately, this is, it's not something that's like, okay, well, let's put a magnifying glass on this one sort of instance. Unfortunately, this is like kind of a spark that is kind of shedding light that needed to be shed light on a really fundamental problem. And not just here in America, but just like also just throughout our society, So that said, as far as like the stresses around that and the stresses of the news around that, the biggest thing is obviously uncertainty, So for me, whatever I can do to kind of kind of clear up any kind of information I can, because it's right now, it's the hardest thing is there's so much information, so much to weed through. I can't really turn it off because the issues at hand right now are very serious to me. But at the same time, I can't also give in to, whatever the latest post was, whatever the latest piece of news was that was being fed to us by the media market or whatever it is, because, everybody has an agenda, and there's a lot more agendas that are going on right now than ever before. So it's really hard to wade through. So as far as strategies, what I do as far as news consumption and what that, it's kind of like its own puzzle game for me, and it kind of helps me to try to, there's all these different pieces, trying to fit them together, trying to figure out what the truth is, trying to figure out what the truth is for me, and how I want to go about it and how I want to contribute, and what my thoughts and what my feelings are. In certain ways, it's therapeutic for me too, because going down that path of investigation for me actually helps me discover a little bit more of who I am, and what I actually stand for. And then also finding, where kind of the truth lies, because one statement is going to be skewed in one way, another statement's going to be skewed in another way. Truth is always somewhere in the middle, right? So, so for me, it's kind of like, as far as news outlets and stuff like that, it's just taking all the information and just, in certain ways, like my mindset's very similar with everything how I make music. I have a bunch of frequencies, you got a bunch of sounds, you just throw them all together in the DAW, and you got to make sense of it somehow, right? So that's how my mind works, and that actually de-stresses me when I'm able to do that. And especially when you get to a certain point where it's like, oh, okay, you find that thread of okay, now I'm understanding kind of what's going on, I'm understanding where I sit with it, and then that gives me that like you said, a little dopamine effect too, of where you get that accomplishment and stuff like that too. So
that's awesome, man. How about you, Trevor?
It's funny. I noticed something that the both of you have brought up that was something that like a concept, and so you brought up what makes you kind of nice and de-stresses to solve a puzzle. And there's a bunch of reasons why that is, and I love doing those too. Actually, just not too long ago, did a big old puzzle with a bunch of family members. Pretty cool. And then Mike used the puzzle analogy as his DAW, and is like the life is like a puzzle and my DAW is like a puzzle. And I think that for almost everybody, de-stressing is in a way problem solving helps de-stress. And from what I've seen, and I've kind of been in and out of it recently, but from what I've seen is it's just a lot of people trying to solve a problem, or other problems, right? Because and next week it'll be something different, and we're just going to keep going through this 2020 everything's a problem kind of thing going on with coronavirus and this police stuff.
What now?
And
I forgot about that.
Yeah, right. And then there was I know there's other stuff I can't think of right now that was in the early part of the year, but because it just keeps happening. And so I found myself and other people who kind of have this, we need to solve the big problems all the time ourselves. And that's like trying to solve stress by adding a huge amount of impossible stress. And it's something that I've had to pull away from. And even now it's hard to do, which is you see big problems and you just kind of have this, I want it to be solved. I want to be a part of solving the big problem, when if everybody, and this is how the dangerous part of going into this social media kind of scenario of everybody's out attacking this giant problem, but nobody's actually really reaching it. They're just kind of throwing everything at it, and nobody's, and it's really stressful to continually try to do this, solve big problems, and it never gets any better. And what I've noticed, and something that I have tried to apply even very recently and now and so on, is this kind of solve the small problems that are around you first and let those trickle out. And one way of doing that, it's clear whether it's, whatever the institution is, whether it's news media, whether it's education, whether it's political parties, whatever the institutions are, they want you to focus on those big things. If you kind of step away from those and look at the people around you, the stuff around you, I've been in scenarios, it's weird, but I've been in scenarios where I've had the almost exact same conversation, one on social media and one in person, and the reactions are completely different. Because the in-person stuff, allows for nuance, allows for understanding and all that kind of stuff. And so you start to spread that out more when it starts small and then grows, instead of trying to pop the big bubble. And I've noticed that's also really relieving, because instead of having this go nowhere conversation for an hour with somebody on the internet, you have this nice conversation with somebody close to you, and you and probably the other person feels a lot better after the conversation, if it doesn't turn into a fight, but actually turns into like, hey, look, we are both just like everybody else in the world right now are trying to solve a problem. Let's talk about it. And I think the other way is just really not working, and it's just adding more and more and more stress and anxiety and all that stuff. And so going into this kind of like, what can I solve and fix around me, and let those, and the same with like your friend is probably trying to do the same thing to you, and you're kind of going back and forth and doing that kind of like, I guess, ground up kind of thing. It just, that's how I've started to like really feel like, okay, having conversations with people around me is like way more relieving than fighting with some random person on the internet. It's actually the opposite. So that's kind of my like navigation of this thing.
Yeah, man. No, I appreciate that. And I really like the way that you kind of framed that in terms of like everybody's trying to help. And that is true. Absolutely. There are people that are doing things that I don't agree with trying to help, but they are all doing what they think is the right thing to do to try to help and trying to solve the problem. And you're right, we don't really know how to fix it yet. If we did, there would be a fix, because this is certainly not the first time that there's been a case of police brutality. So obviously it's just we keep going through this over and over and over again. And this is certainly not the first time we've had riots and we've had protests, and that's been tried before. So there's a lot of this, like, we just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And I think that's because we don't know yet what that solution is. So there's definitely some stress there, like you said, when everybody's just kind of throwing, I think we should do this, I think we should do that, that's how we'll do it. And that is kind of like what you have to do, because if you don't know what the solution is, probably the best thing you can do is just have a whole bunch of different people throw suggestions out and kind of maybe A/B test some stuff and say, like, let's try a little bit of this suggestion. That didn't really work. Let's try this, right? Because we obviously don't know what that solution is for these big institutional problems, But I do like that framing there, because that does connect us to each other, to go like, I might disagree with you, but you know what? You're trying to fix it. And that's great. Like, you're actually trying to be a part of the solution, right? And not trying to destroy things. And that's really, we need to just kind of see each other's humanity in that. I think that's a really popular, powerful thing. You touched on something there too about the, focusing on your personal relationships, your personal issues. And that would be one of the reasons, Mike, and I totally respect your perspective on that, where it's like, yeah, I'm in a very nice position to be able to not have to worry about riots and looting going on in my house. I don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. I have dealt with police brutality and being treated unjustly myself, so I do feel like there's some kinship there. Even though I'm not black, I do have a lot of issues in history with the police that I'm not happy with. I've had some okay interactions with them as well. So I definitely do feel that there can be also, and I feel like I've been discriminated against as well, and looked at, not because of the color of my skin, but because of the car that I drove and where I was parked and all that kind of stuff. I was treated as if I were, a drug person, a criminal, and that kind of thing. And I was definitely treated very poorly. So I understand what that feels like, to be mischaracterized, misjudged, and to be basically, mistreated, essentially, from a prejudgment, essentially. So I understand that part of it. I don't understand, what it's like being a black person and that fear that they carry with the police. I'll never understand what that feels like. But I do want to echo that what Trevor said about the I used to be that person that was like, I was into big political philosophies and into big, like, we need to reform the government, we need to look at this, we need to look at that. And again, looking outwardly into these big things going on in the world, while I had just a mess around me. Like, I just had messy relationships, I had bad habits, I had, just a lot of problems that I should have been like, hey, okay, yes, that's a problem. It can be like, both things can be true. These big institutional issues can be still a problem and something that we should work towards fixing. But it's like that thing, something in the Bible where you should not cast a stone if you live in a glass house, kind of a thing. Like, I was living in a glass house, right? And I had a lot of stuff that I needed to fix and figure out and solve, and be a lot more self-aware and figure out my own issues. And I think for me, just for myself personally, I'm not speaking for anybody else, I would use a lot of the news stories to distract myself from the stuff that I probably should have been doing, right? Because it was like, that's the politicians are the problem. That's the bad guy right over there. Not this, not me. I'm not making any mistakes. I'm great. I'm fine. That guy's really bad, or that police officer is terrible, or that, whatever, that judge is corrupt. So that might all be true though. Like, those politicians might be corrupt. That police officer might be racist. That, that could all be true. But sometimes what I had a tendency to do was to use those as a way to avoid the real hard work that I should have been doing myself. And so I think for the last 6 weeks, I'm catching up on a lifetime of not doing that personal work. And that's what I'm doing right now. And I think that's why I'm being selfish right now, going like, you know what? My issues, that's number one right now, because I've been neglecting it, and I have been looking a lot to these kind of big stressful stories as a way to avoid the interpersonal work that I needed to do. So that's just my story. But I do want to go to the next topic here too. If you guys, Mike, if you have anything to follow up in there, please don't be shy to do that. The other thing I want to talk about is using filters. Now, filters are essentially what I'm calling belief systems, and they're very short. They're usually very simple to understand, like one sentence things that essentially you can say them over and over again to yourself. You can write them down, or you can just kind of like reflect on them from time to time. And what happens is when we are really, really stressed out, a lot of times it's because we are disappointed because we had expectations that things would go differently, right? So when a new story hits and it's really, really stressful, that always just, worries us. Or let's say for sync licensing, we send our music to this library. We really had this vision that it was all going to work out great and they were going to love us and accept our music, and then they reject us, or they don't even listen to our tracks. Like we can see on the play count that they didn't even go to our website and listen to it. And it just feels this like, damn, like I had this expectation, things were going to go this way, and now I'm over here. I want to share this one filter that I've been basically implementing into my life. Now, here's the really cool thing about all this. You don't even have to really believe that this is true or not. I'm going to say that again. This filter can be completely BS. Like it can be completely make-believe. You don't even have to believe that it's true. But if you just start to try to experiment with this for a little while, I think you'll find, like I've been finding, is that my stress levels for making mistakes, things not going my way, and dealing with frustration or rejection or any of that kind of stuff, all that stress really comes down very quickly. It still has an initial sting. It still doesn't feel great, but it doesn't stay with me very long, actually. It goes away really quickly. And the filter that I'm using now is everything is meant to be. Everything that happens to you, all the pain, all the fear, all the rejection, all the stress, all the anxiety, all the negative things that are going on in your life are there for a reason. Now, what's the reason? I'm not God. I'm not the higher power that can tell you what's going on in your life and what that purpose is. But in my life, I've definitely seen in the last couple of weeks a lot of interpersonal pain, interpersonal stress, interpersonal anxiety, and now going through it, realizing that I'm thankful for all that stuff, because that pain or that stress or that anxiety taught me something so valuable. And I know Mike and Trevor, you guys have probably tons of stories about that, where you saw something that's seemingly negative in the beginning and you go, you know what, I'm so glad I went through that. Like that sucked for a while, but now I see how that taught me this really valuable lesson. And so now what I'm doing is, actually I have that on some of my sticky notes where I'm putting affirmations all over my house. Everything meant to be basically for me. So let's say that I stubbed my toe, like I'm walking and it's happened a couple times in the last couple weeks and it hurts. It hurts so bad. And I would in the past rise to anger, actually. I would stub my toe, feel the pain, I get angry. Very, 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 very angry. Because the anger, I don't know why, that's just like the first thing that comes to mind when I'm in a lot of pain, just a lot of anger. And now when it happens, I go, wow, that hurts. But you know what? Everything's meant to be. It's okay. It's going to be all right in the long run. And just having that quick reaction, it's almost like a fire extinguisher, putting out the fire right away, right? If I didn't have that sort of like little tool, that little filter that I put over my vision and my perception, I would let that anger just build and build and build, because I didn't want my toe to get stubbed. That wasn't part of my plan today. I wasn't planning on waking up and going, I should get a stubbed toe, right? But now that I have this other tool and I can basically just kind of adjust how I perceive things that don't seem like they're great for me, things that are very painful and like extremely painful and extremely scary, I can now go, I know this is scary. It's okay, because I know everything happens for a reason, right? Everything is meant to be. And I don't think I really believed that and really had that sort of as part of my toolkit for most of my life. It's a brand new thing that I'm doing. And I'm just here to report you guys. I'm not trying to, I'm not giving you advice, not telling you guys to do this or whatever. If you want to try it, I invite you to try it. And it's certainly, for me, helped everything. Like all of my stress gone down. I feel so much more at ease, so much more just to kind of accepting of like everything. It doesn't mean I'm just laying around and being hippy dipping and hoping that like things just come to me or whatever. Like I'm not going there. I'm still living my life. I'm still doing my work, and I'm still going for my goals and working for the things I want to work for. But if I don't get it and it doesn't work out, or I don't, something gets in my way, or there's an obstacle or something like that, I now have this new thing that really, really, really helps me. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. But anyways, Mike, how about your thoughts?
For me, I don't know if it's really like, first off, I don't know if I really do a good job of putting a filter on things like around me or whatever. Like I do know that I have So I'm the type of person that I've always put a lot of expectations on myself and a lot of situations around me. I have been able to get better at that, but that is still something that I'm working on and everything like that too. So for me, it always comes from this thought of, basically like the saying of like, just do your part, and that's to me, and that's to anyone else or everything else that's around me for whatever situation it is. And it doesn't necessarily mean like, okay, well, here's your job. Like I deem this to be your job, so that's what your part is. It's like, so for instance, what I mean by that is, as a musician, and as a composer that's been working on jobs, I've found early on, well, not as early as I would like, but earlier in the sense of a few years ago, where my part really was just to turn things in. Of course, after, your experience and your talent and whatever, that's what drives the how well you do it, from job to job and your experience, as far as understanding how to follow a brief and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, your job, for me, my job was just to turn it in, And so when I started thinking of things that way, then yeah, my stress level just went down dramatically, because at that point, my expectations are that like, okay, it's kind of like a trust, right? I trust like, hey, I've been doing this for long enough that I know that what I'm doing is good, Now, is everything that I'm doing the best thing that I'm doing? No, and that's okay. So, and that's kind of where that comes from. And, but I do know that like, so if I do it, turn it in and don't get it, that's not a failure, but if I don't turn it in, that's the failure. So that's where my whole do your part kind of thing comes from. As far as anything else, as far as like, like expectations for me is, a big thing. And then also understanding, so I expect a lot of things, basically like I have a high baseline for what I think is common sense and what I think is like, everybody should know this, or this is something everybody should be thinking of, so that is something I'm working on, trying to gain a better understanding as to not only the fact that other people aren't necessarily thinking that, or that's not like things that are obvious to me aren't obvious to them, but also why that is, so and it's more work in progress for me in that sense, and working towards trying to keep up a dialogue and to come up with that kind of understanding, which brings us back to what we were just talking about before, where I think like at the end of the day, the biggest problem really always comes to understanding, and not just the ability to understand between two different people, but also the effort put into understanding, so there are plenty of problems in this world where, one group of people or even just one person just does not want to put any effort into understanding what the other person is trying to say or represents, whatever the case is, and that's usually where problems arise. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Communication right there, man. I mean, that's the world's biggest problem, I think. I literally think communication is the world's biggest problem. It's like once we crack that nut, we're going to go to Venus. We're going to do some incredible things. But yeah, misunderstanding, like you said, not and saying things that we don't mean, or yeah, miscommunication, man, is like the core of like most of our issues. Absolutely. How about you, Trevor?
It's funny. We all thought that social media was going to bring us into a better level of communication, but I think it's kind of done the opposite. But man, okay. So now I'm trying to remember, because I was like deep into Mike's thing. The question was.
Well, I had the filter essentially about like
filters, right.
Yep.
So I don't think I brought this up the last time we talked, or maybe it's somebody else I was talking. I don't remember. So let me know. So I had this. Somebody explained to me this way of kind of approaching things, which is very similar to your filter, which is essentially treat everything that ever happens to you as the best thing that's happened to you, and what, like examples are a pretty easy one, which is one that everybody writes songs about, is like a breakup, right? And maybe even like when you're older, a bad breakup, like when you're like in your early 20s or whatever, not like teenager breakups, but when you're in like 20s and you've been in a like toxic relationship for a while and you just don't want to let it go, but like more than likely breaking up is the best thing. Or maybe you don't think it's the best thing that's going to happen to you, but you break up and then you go and have an amazing marriage after that or something, right? Like in the moment, you're just like, my world is over. This person I love is I'm not going to be able to see her anymore, and all this stuff for him or whatever. And So in the moment, which is very hard to do because I'm in that moment right now, not breakup moment, but I'm in a moment where I'm stressed out about like what might happen. I'm at like this like I've been working on this major deal for a while, and I'm in that moment where like if it falls off, like that's going to hit me hard, and I have to try and figure out how to, like, I'm pretty sure it's happening, so I'm not like super stressed about it, but there is this kind of like, if it doesn't work out, I need to be able to, like, I need to figure out how to have the mental fortitude to be like, all right, this is the best thing that's happened to you. The deal didn't follow through. That means you can do something better. And that mentality, while it's really hard to have, is a muscle that I think we should all be flexing, like on small stuff to help us on big stuff. Because I'll tell you, like, thinking back about bad moments, the only thing I really remember about the bad moments are not like what happened because of those bad moments, whether it was a breakup or a bad deal or I failed on a project or whatever. All I remember is what I did afterwards, like the sulking or the like, oh man, I'm going to take a break and go feel sorry for myself. Like, I only remember that stuff. I don't really remember the repercussions of the actual event because I like eventually just did something else. Like I went and did another project, or I found another person, or whatever. And so I think, well, I'm not saying it's easy. It's actually very hard, saying somebody who's in the middle of it right now, trying to flex that muscle of like, just keep telling yourself what happens right now, unless you die, right? Everything else
even
is the
that
best
though.
thing.
Even that.
Well, actually, yeah. Hey, you know what? You got me there.
We're going deep.
Yeah. You did get me there. So, but you could, yeah. I mean, all of these things could, whatever it is, could be the best thing to ever happen to you. And trying to constantly tell yourself that, like, I think will help you navigate and help soften the blow at the very least, and let you, come out of any kind of scenario, big or small, like better. And so that's, a filter, which is very similar to what Jesse was already saying, but a filter that was introduced to me very recently, and I've been really trying to apply that because I think it's really good, especially when looking back and being like, man, if I would have applied this to the last like 5 things that have happened to me, maybe it would have been nice.
Yeah, it's just another way of saying the same thing, but I like that way, that like just treating everything as if it's the best gift you ever could have been given. But not all gifts are birthday cakes. Mm-hmm. Some gifts are boat anchors on your head, pulling you down into the ground. Like, that's a gift though. Like, it doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like crap and it hurts, or like feeling like you're just on a tightrope, like where you are, Trevor, right now. Like, well, which way is this going to go? But it is a gift. It is, for whatever reason, it is teaching you a lot of stuff about yourself, and it's basically an opportunity to grow and to learn and to strengthen that muscle. But I also want you guys to, everybody listening, to remember that we're not saying that we are going to allow you to get away from grief or from sadness or from disappointment. I don't think there's a way to get away from that stuff. I think that when, if Trevor, your deal doesn't go through, you're going to be bummed, man. And that's okay. You should feel bummed because you have a lot of hope on this kind of thing. You've worked also a lot for it. So it's also like this feeling of like, man, I put so much effort into this and it didn't work out. So that's okay. That's a part of the grieving process. You're supposed to grieve. There's big things that happen to you, and then there's, medium things and then small things, but there's all different levels of grief and sadness and sorrow that we feel. And there's no getting away from that. Okay. So I hope you guys don't take that from this chat that we're telling you this, like, get out of jail free card that does this. No, what I'm saying is, as you're going through that grief, put the filter on all of that, right? All that grief, all that sorrow, the stuff that you are feeling, you're going to feel that. And you need to just take as long as it takes for you to kind of, grieve that and feel that loss. But then put the filter on it to say, like, this is all part of the plan, right? This is the best thing that happened to me, or this is meant to be, or whatever resonates with you. You put that on top of it, and then you realize there's an end date to this grief, right? You know that, like, okay. And then also the other thing is that you guys always know that like, it's sometimes you have to close the door before you see the next open door. I think having this filter will allow you to see more open doors afterwards. That's what it'll help you do, because sometimes you get a door closed on you and then you keep your head down. You don't want to look for anything new because you're so shut down, you're so scared or so disappointed that you don't want to even like try again. You don't want to have faith to go see if something else can work out. But when you put this other filter on top of that grief and that sorrow and say, like, you know what, this is meant to be because it's going to open up the door for something new, or even just say that to yourself, this is really hurting and this is hard, but I know I'm going to go through this because there's a great opportunity in the future. Just saying that to yourself, writing that down, having that be in your mind, you will see the opportunities when they present themselves to you, and they'll present themselves to you fairly quickly. In my life, that's how it's usually been. It doesn't take a long time before something new and awesome comes into my life, and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so thankful that this is here now, and now I see why I had to let go of that other thing, or why that other thing just had to not work out so that this can happen. And so for whatever that is, I don't know, somebody authoring our existence, a simulation, God, I don't care what you call it. This is just what you guys have all heard this, have all felt this in your personal lives, and you've actually gone through this to know you're still here, you're still awake, you're still alive, and all those terrible things that seemed so terrible back then are not that terrible, actually. They're actually really great things. And so this is a journey of life. We're all on our individual journeys, which is kind of fun. It's really cool. And thank you, Mike and Trevor, for sharing, a part of your guys' journey and what you guys have been going through and have gone through. And for those of you that leave me comments or write me emails, please keep doing that, because I love to hear about your guys' journey, where you guys are at. And you guys have been very, very open and vulnerable about your real struggles, real life struggles. And so I'm always just honored and humbled that you guys feel that I'm a safe person. And I hope I do prove that trust to you guys, that I am a safe person for you guys to share that stuff with me. And I think it's just so cool that we have a community here where we can share this stuff. So with that being said, now I give you guys all permission. You can be stressed out again now. You can go turn on the TV if you'd like to. You can go get on the social media. You can go right back to where you were at right before this podcast. I give you full permission to do that. But maybe hopefully taking some of the stuff you learned and that you were exposed to in this episode with you. And obviously, come back and watch this if it helps you in the future. So thank you guys so much for watching.